There's a story in the Bible that has served as a guiding light to me in two very important occasions in my life. It's a man. I've called the man in this story a role model for me, and he has provided that for me on some very important occasions. I've told this story before, but it's been a long time, and I think it needs updating. The man's name is Nehemiah. His story is told in a small, obscure book of the Bible, and one that seems to be rarely noted. And I can go to church year after year after year, and hearing a sermon out of the book of Nehemiah is as rare as hen's teeth. In fact, in my recollection, I'm the only one I've ever heard speak on it, but then I don't hear that many other speakers since everybody seems to want me to speak most of the time. But nevertheless, he's there, and his story is incredibly inspiring, especially at certain pivotal times in a person's life. Now, everyone knows that Judah was carried away captive into Babylon. Most know that it was revealed to both Daniel and Jeremiah that the captivity would last for 70 years. But fewer people realize that by the time the return came, Babylon had ceased to exist as a separate kingdom and now was just a dependency on the king of Persia. They had now taken it over. It was Darius who, about 70 years later, allowed the Jews to go back, some of them to go back, and the temple was rebuilt about that period of time. What sometimes seems to be forgotten is that relatively few of the Jews who were in Babylon actually returned to Jerusalem at that time. There were a lot of Jews who had stayed there. They were the poor. They were the poor, the downtrodden, the farmers, the goat keepers, and what have you, that did not get carried off into Babylon. Virtually the entire city of Jerusalem did. But the Jews in surrounding communities, farmers and what have you, keepers of vineyards, got to stay put. So they were there. Nehemiah then was born in exile. He had never been to Jerusalem. He had no personal memory of Jerusalem. All he knew was what his mother and his father had taught him. Have to realize that they themselves probably had no personal memory of Jerusalem because it's been 140 years from the captivity until finally Nehemiah asked God and asked the king if he could go back and begin to restore the security of the city of Jerusalem. Actually, he wasn't going back to build the temple. It was already built. What his problem was, well, it will become evident when we actually begin to look at what he wrote in his book. In the first chapter of Nehemiah, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, it came to pass in the month Chislev in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, as I said, about 140 years after the fall of Jerusalem. I was in Shushan the palace. Hanani, one of my kinsmen, came, he and certain men of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped who had been left of the captivity and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. All these poor farmers, their children of these poor farmers who were left there, the remnant, he calls them, who were still there, are in terrible affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down. The gates of the city are burned with fire. And Nehemiah said, when I heard these words, I sat down and I wept. And I mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Now, the thing that strikes me about Nehemiah is that he was a caring man. He was an emotional man. I think an awful lot of people, when they heard this story, would have been said, oh, that's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that. I'll pray for those poor people. And would have gone away and prayed for them, or not, as the case may be. It would not have touched, I think, many people. It hit Nehemiah right to the core of his being. I get the impression reading it that his knees became weak. He had to sit down, and he wept. And he fasted then for certain days and prayed to God about what was happening. He had a good job as the king's wine steward. He was not a man in poverty himself. He was secure. Actually, there's every reason to think that the king knew him and liked him because he was looking at him enough to recognize when Nehemiah was down in the mouth. An awful lot of kings would not give a hang how their wine steward felt on any given day. But he did. Well, anyway, I think we need to think about, if we had heard that kind of news from Jerusalem, what would our response have been? There were plenty of downtrodden and suffering people in the world of that day. In fact, I think there are more who were than who weren't in the world of that time. Why did this news hit this man so hard that he cried and couldn't even stand up? Had to recover himself later. What was it about it? I think it may have been ethnic identity, but I honestly think it was more than that. I think it was the identity of the faith that made this hit him so hard. Because it was not merely that these were his kinsmen who were suffering. It was his kinsmen in the faith who were suffering. In any case, it is the revealing of the heart of a man that we see here. A heart that I think seems less evident nowadays than it did then. Remember Paul wrote to the Galatians on one occasion, he said, "As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good to all men, especially to them who are of the household of faith." Now, it's a good thing to be involved in the community. It's a good thing, as you have done here, to participate in food drives and clothing drives and to contribute to PATH in the local community. It enhances the church's reputation. It's even a kind of evangelism. But it would seem strange, wouldn't it, if we really apply ourselves to the community and then neglect our own? But it's very easy to do. Nehemiah, I think, was torn right to his core of his being, not because somebody was suffering, because it was people like him in the faith, not just ethnically, who were suffering. And I think we need to give that some serious thought, to be sure that with all of our good works and all of our concern for the community, that we never forget to be concerned for our own in whatever circumstance. In order for you to be able to be responsive to our own, you've got to know about them. You've got to know who they are. You've got to know where they live. You've got to know their circumstances, and you've got to realize when they're not here so that you can respond, so you can go visit. And I know as we all get a little older and become a little more sensitive to that as I get a little older, sometimes old people can live very lonely lives. And it's very important that we, for those of us who are of our household of faith, that we don't let them live that lonely life if we have anything we can do about it. That's off another subject. Now, the prayer of Nehemiah, which follows, shows a striking similarity, I think, to Daniel's earlier prayer, and I think it's also instructive for us. He said, I fasted and prayed, and I said, I beseech you, O Lord God of heaven, the great and terrible God, that keeps covenant and mercy for them that love him and observe his commandments. I mean, we know we can rely on you to keep your covenant, he says. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open that you may hear the prayer of your servant, which I pray before you now, day and night, for the children of Israel, your servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Both I and my father's house have sinned. It's so striking in Daniel that Daniel doesn't say, well, I realize all these Israelites have sinned, something terrible. They really deserve what they had coming. No. He said, we. He included himself. So did Nehemiah. His first concern in this prayer, it starts right off at the beginning, is the confession of sin. And I hadn't really paid a lot of attention to it until this morning. And I was looking at it, I said, he wasn't confessing any specific sin. He just was acknowledging that he was guilty of sin. I'm a sinner. I have been wrong. I have done wrong. So he doesn't have to sit there and pour out before God all the grisly details of the wrong things he's done. God already knows all that. What God wants to know is whether he knows it or not. And so that's where he starts in this prayer. We have dealt, he said, very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments, which you commanded your servant. Remember, I beseech you, the word that you command your servant Moses, saying, if you transgress, remember, I know what you said, God. If you transgress, I will scatter you abroad among the nations. But if you turn to me and keep my commandments and do them, though there were of you cast to the uttermost part of the heaven, I'll gather them back from there and bring them to the place I have chosen to set my name. So let's remember, God, what you promised. You said you'd scatter us. We didn't keep covenant, and you did. but you also promised that if we will turn to you, you'll take us back. Now these are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, I beseech you, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who desire to fear your name, and prosper, I pray, your servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. For I, he says, was the king's wine steward. He was the man who had to taste of the wine before the king would drink it. His life was on the line for the king, day by day. Well, it came to pass, Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1, in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never before been sad in his presence. I was always congenial, friendly, warm, no doubt humorous in some of the things that he would say from time to time. He was a nice guy to have around here. The king would not have responded to him the way he did. Why, the king said to me, "Why is your countenance sad? You're not sick. This is nothing but sorrow of heart." And Nehemiah was frightened because the king had the power of life and death over him. The king says, "You live, you live." He says, "You die, you die." And there's no appeal to the decision of the king. So he was somewhat frightened by this response. But I thought it was really fascinating, the congenial relationship that existed here from a king to a wine steward, in the sense that he looked at him and noticed that things were not as they had been before, which I think speaks to the character of Nehemiah and the way in which he had related to and done a good job and been pleasant to the king in all of his job. And he said, "Let the king live forever. Why should my countenance not be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies waste? The gates thereof are burnt up with fire." And that basically meant there's no protection whatever for the people living in the city. They can't close the gates at night for protection. They're just totally vulnerable. And the king said to me, "What are you asking for?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. Apparently, a quick, silent prayer went up at that moment. And I said to the king, "If it please the king, and if I, your servant, have found favor in your sight, that you would send me to Judah, to the city of my father's sepulchres, that I might build it." And the king said to me, the queen was also sitting right there, "For how long shall your journey be, and when will you return?" And that is also very revealing. He wanted the man back. He didn't want to just send him away. He wanted him to come back, even though it was going to obviously be some months that he would have to be gone of necessity. So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time when I would come back. "Moreover," I said to the king, "if it would please the king, let letters be given to me to all the governors on the other side of the river, that they may convey me over all the way to Judah." I want safe passage from these people all the way. "And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gate of the palace, for the wall of the city, the house that I shall enter into." And the king granted me, according to the good hand of God upon me. He's prayed, he's trusted God, and you think what this man, a wine steward, asked the king for, and the king did it. It's an amazing thing to see. I think it speaks very loudly to the character of a man named Nehemiah. And he's a man of tremendous character, as we're going to see. I thought the interesting aside here, the name Asaph, or Asaph, is it really a Levitical name, the name of one of the singers of God's house, which leads me to believe that the keeper of the king's forest, clean over in the Palestinian area, was actually a Levite, a Jew who got left behind whenever everybody went captive and was still there and had been appointed because he was a diligent man. They didn't seem to have any problem at all back in those days of putting Jews in charge of important things, and I guess it was because they saw that they worked well, they were diligent, and they could be trusted. So I came to the governors beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains, plural, of the army and horsemen with me. Now you understand that in these days, a horse was an instrument of war. It was for battle. It was not for agriculture. They were strictly they were weapons. So he got captains in the plural and armed cavalry to go with him on this journey. So when he showed up with letters from the king, armed cavalry behind him, he got pretty fair treatment from these people. When Sanballat, who was apparently a Moabite, and Tobiah the Ammonite heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly because there was a man come to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. Now, you should know that these men are part of that body of people that we today have come to know as Palestinians. The Palestinian people are, I think, almost certainly, naturally, with some admixture down ethnically, mixtures down through the years with Arabs and what have you. But they really are basically the descendants of Moab and Ammon, the sons of Lot. And there's a long history of animosity, which we now see here, between these people and the Jews. It goes back this far. In fact, it goes back a whole lot further than that. It goes back prior to the Babylonian captivity that these fights were going on. So he said, I came to Jerusalem and I was there for 3 days. Now, being a man who was circumspect, thoughtful about what he did, he said, I got up in the night. I took a handful of men with me. I didn't tell anybody what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. At this time, he merely has authorization, and he isn't sharing with anybody what he is about to do yet. He said, I went up there there was not any beast with me save the beast I rode upon, and a handful of men who followed along with him. I went out by night by the gate of the valley, by the dragon well. I went over to the dung port. I viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down. The gates were consumed with fire. The place was total rubble. I went to the gate of the fountain, to the king's pool, and I got to the place where the beast that was under me couldn't find any way to get through. So I got up and I went in the night by the brook and viewed the wall and turned back and entered the gate of the valley, and then I came back the other way. And the rulers didn't know where I went. They didn't know what I did. Neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, the nobles, the rulers, nor anybody who did the work. Hadn't told anybody what I was doing. You know, this brought to mind, it's especially important. I think he kept his own counsel on this until the time came to move. And I remember something I read in a book by Robert Townsend years ago. He said, if you discovered a way to end pollution, this was back when pollution was a big deal, in all 50 states for 50 cents per state, what you should do is just put the money together yourself, it's not that much, and go out and do it. Don't tell anybody you're going to do it, because if you tell anybody you're going to do it, they will find millions of ways to tell you you can't do it, it can't be done, you shouldn't try it, to cut the rug out from under you as you get ready to do it. Of all the people, you must not tell Congress what you're about to do. If you tell anyone about it, including your own family will say, who do you think you are? You know, you hick from the hills of Arkansas, what do you think you're going to be doing by trying to do something like that? You're low-born, forget about it. So he said, I said to them, I said to them, you see the distress we're in. Went to the elders. You see how Jerusalem lies waste. You see that the gates are all burned. We don't even have timber for the gates. People can waltz right in here to their heart's content. Come, let's build up the wall of Jerusalem so that we are no longer a reproach to the people around us, where they can no longer reproach us, no longer afflict us, and where we will no longer be the laughing stock or the butt of all jokes in this part of the world. That's what he told them. So then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me. I told them the king's words that were spoken to me and how much support he had behind him. And they said, let's rise up and build. And so they strengthened their hands for the good work. Now Sanballat and Tobiah, a Moabite and an Ammonite, they heard it. They laughed us to scorn. They despised us and says, what do you think you're doing? Are you going to rebel against the king that you need walls? And that is a lie. They knew better than that. They knew he had nothing to fear from the king. They wanted to build up the walls and the gates because of these two idiots who were causing them all kinds of grief and doing a lot of harm among their people. That's what they were doing. And I answered and said to them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Now, that is an incredibly strong statement made to these Palestinians. The NIV says, you have no share in Jerusalem, or any claim, or any historic right to it. So get out of my face. Chapter 3 then contains the details of the rebuilding efforts with locations, the names of those people who are working in the various locations. You know, it must have looked like it was a disturbed ant colony by the time they got to work, because people were working everywhere around that city at the same time, and they were working hard and working fast. It did not go unnoticed. Nehemiah chapter 4. It came to pass when Sanballat heard that we built the wall, he was angry. He took great indignation and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren in the army of Samaria and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing out here? Are they going to fortify themselves? Are they going to sacrifice?" Oh, that suggests they hadn't been. Temples built, no sacrifices are being done. Wonder why. It says, "Well, they're going to make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish which are burned?" Now Tobiah the Ammonite was with him, and he said, "Even what they build, if a fox goes up on it, it'll break down their stone wall." Just total ridicule. Big deal. Where are they going to get their materials? Well, they were going to get their materials out of the rocks that had been torn down. They were going to gather them out of there and build them back. It can be done. It's been done again and again. That first obstacle they threw to them was very familiar to me. "It'll never work," they said. It's why there's little point in telling anybody what you're going to do. They'll just tell you, "Oh, it won't work. You can't make that happen." Who do you think you are? They'll offer 100 reasons why you shouldn't do it, can't do it, aren't qualified to do it. It'll fail if you do it. If a fox jumps on your wall, the whole thing's going to come crashing down, is what they're going to tell you. I've been there. I know exactly what that's like, and I know how inevitable it tends to be. Nehemiah, though, didn't look at these guys. He looked to God, and he turned and said, "Hear, God, we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own head and give them for a prey in the land of captivity. Don't cover their iniquity. Don't let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders," right in the face of the builders, because the one they were really reproaching was God. "So we built the wall. And all the wall was joined together to the half of it because the people had a mind to work." This is wonderful to see this type of thing to happen. When a leader shows up on the scene, a man whom God obviously is blessing, a man whom God is obviously going to lead, when he comes there, the people get to work and things can begin to happen. There are so many examples in the Bible of the importance of strong leadership. And it makes a big difference, as a matter of fact. It came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians now come on the picture, and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, Ashdod today is in Gaza, heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up and the breaches were beginning to be stopped. They were furious. They conspired all of them together to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. If they had had rockets, they would have fired them into Jerusalem indiscriminately. They didn't have them, fortunately, in those days. And what is really interesting to me is they didn't have what it took to really face the Jews down in combat face to face. They made a lot of noise, a lot of talk, a lot of threats, a lot of intimidation, but no real action ever took place. Nehemiah says, "We made our prayer to God and we set a watch against them day and night because of them." Two things. Make your prayer to God and set your watch. You don't just make prayer to God and go on as usual. You actually have to take measures sometimes to be sure that you are protected and your workers are protected and that what's going to be done is done. Pray to God, trust Him, take measures. That's really important. But we got a problem. Judah said, "The strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there's a lot of rubbish. We're having a terrible time building the wall. Our adversaries have said that we won't know. We won't be able to see them. They'll be able to creep in amongst us in all this wreckage around here, and they'll be on us before we know it and cause the work to cease. There's just too much rubble. So I said in the lower places behind the wall and on the higher places, I set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows." They all got their weapons out, every family, including the kids, and he perched them here and there to watch over what was taking place. And if the time came to fight, they would fight. Men, women, and if necessary, even children. I looked and I rose up and I said to the nobles and the rulers and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Don't be afraid. Remember God and fight for what is yours. I just think this man is such a leader, and underlining for all of us, and is a godly man, and who says if it's time comes we have to fight, boys and girls, you had better be ready to fight. It came to pass when our enemies heard that we'd figured it out, and God had brought their counsel to naught, we went back to the wall, work on the wall, every one to his work. It came past that from that time forward, half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held the spears, the shields, and the bows, and the habergeons, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. They which built the wall, they that bear burdens, those that loaded them up, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. Boy, what a vision you get from that. You're a bricklayer working on a wall. You got your trowel in one hand, you got your weapon in the other hand, and you do your job, and you keep looking around, and you got people up on top to tell you if anyone's getting close. These people were ready to fight if they had to fight. And I think because they were ready, they never had to, which is another lesson that comes along. Anyhow, he said they built upon the wall, all these people, and also the guy that sounded the trumpet to alarm was right by my side. And so I said to the nobles and the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we're separated upon the wall, one far from the other. In what place, therefore, you hear the sound of the trumpet, come together there. God will fight for us. He would, but that doesn't mean they weren't going to be expected to fight too. So we labored in the work. Half of them held the spears from the morning until the stars appeared. And likewise, the same set time I said to my people, let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard to us, and labor in the day. So we all gather inside the city in the night, and we have our watch all set. In the daytime, we get out and work on the walls. So neither I, nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took our clothes off except for washing for this entire period of time. Now in chapter 5, Nehemiah institutes some important economic reforms to put to rest some really usurious principles that had been followed there, practices of some of the people. And he also made it a point not to take what was due to him. He is a remarkable, generous, hard-working, self-effacing man and a good role model for anybody. Nehemiah 6. Now it came to pass, and here's where a couple of times in my lifetime this man has stood as a beacon to me. It came to pass when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arabian, and the rest of our enemies heard I had built the wall, there was no breach left, though at that time we hadn't actually got the doors set up on the gates, which implies they had actually built them. They just hadn't set them in place yet. Sanballat and Geshem sent to me and said, look, come down here and let's meet together in one of the villages in the plain of Ono. We need to have a parley here. But they thought to do me mischief. He just saw through that right away. There is, it seems to me, in these people a singular lack of courage. They tried ridicule. They tried intimidation, just like their descendants, the Palestinians, do to this day. They were not willing to face the Jews in battle. Why? They're afraid. They knew they'd lose. But even now, the Palestinians will engage in suicide bombings and blind rocket attacks, which are of no strategic or tactical value at all. You think about it. They're not accomplishing anything with it. Terrorism does not accomplish any strategic or any tactical value. They have no value beyond propaganda and intimidation. And trying to intimidate Nehemiah was an exercise in futility. It was just not going to work. He said, I sent messengers to them saying this, I am doing a great work so that I can't come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down and talk to the likes of you? That little verse right there was a guiding light to me on more than one occasion when I've had some hard decisions to make. When people wanted to talk, well, let's postpone this decision. You don't have to decide this right now. When there needs to be some more conversation about it. You know, I remember when I had one of the hardest decisions I ever had in my life, a decision to leave the former church organization back in 1978. We were living in Austin at the time. I was working on a PhD at the University of Texas. A very good friend, a man I loved very much and thought the world of. He's long since died, but I still remember him fondly. He and his wife came down to visit Allie and I. They knew we were very troubled by various things and knew I was considering resigning. The plea was, don't do it now. Wait. This decision you're about to make will be financially ruinous to you. And, we listened, and we kept right on loving them even after that decision had been made, but it had no effect on us at all. And I've thought about that and wondered exactly why it didn't. Part of it was because I had, I think within the very short period of time before that, had read this section out of Nehemiah. And years ago, I believed that God called me to ministry. I believe that the fruits have borne it out. These are things that you don't have to believe but I'm simply telling them so you'll understand what motivates me and what kind of makes me feel the way I do. More than once, I have faced the question of whether I will pursue that ministry or allowed myself to be sidetracked for one reason or another. The first time it was a serious question, I had just read this verse. And I thought, I got a job to do. I'm not going to stop and sit around and talk about it. There's nothing to discuss. You don't, when you actually believe that you have been handed a ministry by God, and He has been given the gifts that go along with that ministry, what are you going to do? You can't, when somebody asks you to stop and to wait, what can you do? Well, if you really believe in it, you have to go straight for full speed ahead. I've had plenty of failures to confess to God myself, but thanks to Nehemiah, I have still been able to continue in this task because he served at that crucial moment a role model for me to saying, no, I am not going to delay the decision I have to make, which will ensure that I can continue with my ministry wherever God takes me with it, in order to sit around and wait to see what happens somewhere else. So I didn't. He said, they sent to me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them after the same manner. Then sent Sanballat his servant to me in like manner the 5th time with an open letter in his hand. I guess that means it's available for everybody. Wherein it was written, it is reported among the heathen, even Gashmu says it, whoever he was, that you and the Jews think to rebel, and that's why you're building the wall, that you may be their king according to these words. And you have also appointed prophets to preach of you at Jerusalem, saying, there's a king in Judah. And now it's going to be reported to the king according to your words. We're going to tell the king what you're doing. So come on now, and let's take counsel together. Note, it was an open letter. It was a flagrant lie. Just a total lie. It is reported, they said. They made it up out of whole cloth. It is as current as today's newspapers. It goes on all the time. And it's really kind of hard for us sometimes to admit to ourselves that what we're reading in print, what we're hearing on television, is nothing but a flagrant lie. We have a hard time believing it because we let our own lie detectors become confused. Lies and intimidation are the currency of some people, and those people have got to be opposed wherever they are. So I sent to him, saying, there's no such thing as you say. You have made it up out of your own heart. For they all made us afraid, saying, their hands will be weakened from the work that it's not done. Now, therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. He called the man a liar, said he made it up out of his own heart, and called it what it was, cheap intimidation. And it is a technique used down through all generations of man to this day to affect political outcomes in our society. Afterward, he said, I came into the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabeel. He was closed up in his house. And he said, let's meet together in the house of God inside the temple. We can shut the doors in the temple because they're going to come to slay you. In fact, in the night they will come to slay you. So let's go on in the temple. And he said, Nehemiah said, should a man such as I am flee? And who is there, being as I am, would go into the temple to save his life? I have no business in there. I have no right to be in there. Is a man like me going to go in there to save his life? I will not go in. Courage. and a realization you can't compromise at any point with these kinds of people. They will eat you up if you do. I perceived that God had not sent him. He pronounced this prophecy against me, for Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. Therefore he was hired, that I should be afraid and do so and sin, that they might have a matter for an evil report, that they could reproach me. My God, he said, think upon Tobiah and Sanballat according to these their works. And listen to this. And on the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets that would have put me in fear. Even his own people, even his own priests, even his own prophets in his own synagogues or temple were trying to put him in fear. There were treasonous people there. Verse 15, so the wall was finished in the 25th day of the month Elul in 52 days. You don't think it necessarily was that fast when you're reading through this. 52 days they restored that wall because everybody and his dog, well, maybe the dogs were just watching, was working on that wall. It came to pass when our enemies heard it, and all the heathen about us saw these things, they were much cast down in their own eyes, for they finally perceived that this work was wrought of our God. Man, what a lesson. Moreover, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came to them, for there were many in Judah who were sworn to him, because he was a son-in-law of somebody, and his son Johan had taken a daughter of one of the Jews. Also, they reported his good deeds to me, and they uttered my words to him, and Tobiah sent letters trying to make me afraid, just kept it up. And I'm sure there came a point in time where anything he thought came from Tobiah went straight in the trash, got burned. 2 incidents, and Nehemiah's response to them have given me backbone on 2 crucial occasions. 1, I am doing a big work. Why should I come down to talk? 2, should a man in my position cling to the altar to save his neck, I will not do it. Courage, you understand, I hope, is not the absence of fear. I mean, you can be afraid and still have courage. Courage is the determination to do your duty in the face of fear. And I fear sometimes it is that word duty that gets short shrift. We don't admit to ourselves or own up to or accept the fact that God has laid duty upon us. Courage means that even when you're afraid, no matter whether your fear is of something great or something small, courage is what it takes to do it anyway because it's your duty. This man's a good role model for your children. It's a story to tell and tell again to children so they'll grow up understanding. And when you have a duty to perform before God, you don't let fear deter you. He's a hero who would never, like most heroes, ever see himself as such. He was just a man who had a duty to fulfill, and he couldn't see himself doing anything else. It's that simple. God send us more men like Nehemiah.